This is Sergeant Michael Riley, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, assigned to Project Iceworm Reclamation. Official log for 14 September 2025. It's been 72 hours since we lost contact with command. It's been 24 hours since we lost Corporal Davis. The phenomenon is getting worse. The resonant frequency is increasing. I don't know what was in this place, what they built down here in the dark, but it's awake now. We were sent to decommission a Cold War listening post buried under the Greenland ice sheet, a forgotten relic. We thought it was a simple cleanup job. We were supposed to be in and out in 2 weeks. But the listening post was just a cover story, a lie built on top of an older, much darker secret. Deep beneath the American base, we found it, a Nazi U-boat pen, a ghost facility from World War II, perfectly preserved in the ice for 80 years. And in its heart, we found their final, most insane project, the reason for this whole place. The documents called it Projekt Chronos. But the men who worked on it called it something else. Die Glocke, the bell. We thought it was a myth, a conspiracy theory, but it's real. And we, God help us, we turned it on. Now the past is bleeding through. The ice is melting, and the ringing won't stop. This is no longer a reclamation mission. This is a containment operation, and we are failing.
The official mission was a total cakewalk, or so we were told. Project Iceworm Reclamation. Sounded important, but it was basically a glorified garbage run. Our engineering unit was choppered into the middle of nowhere Greenland to a site so desolate it made the moon look like a metropolis. Our job? Formally decommission a defunct U.S. military listening post from the 60s that was buried 1,000 feet under the ice. Map it, strip it of any sensitive tech, and prep it for permanent sealing. Easy. The surface was nothing but a small frost-covered antenna array and a heavily reinforced elevator shaft. The real facility was down below. As our 5-man team descended into the earth, the mood was light. We were cracking jokes, complaining about the cold. We were soldiers on a routine mission. We had no idea we were descending into a tomb. The American base was exactly what we expected. A small, cramped network of tunnels and rooms filled with dusty, analog-era radio equipment and frozen cans of Spam. It was a time capsule of the Cold War. Our first task was to run a full geological scan of the surrounding ice and bedrock to ensure the structure was stable. That's when things got weird. Specialist Chen, our tech guy, was running the ground-penetrating radar. "Hey, Sarge," he called me over, pointing at his screen. "You're gonna want to see this." I looked at the monitor. The scan showed our little American base, a small cluster of hollow spaces. But deep beneath it, maybe another 200 feet down, the radar was showing something else, something massive. A huge, cavernous, and distinctly man-made structure that wasn't on any of our charts. It was a perfect rectangle with what looked like a long, wide channel leading out from it. "That's impossible," I said. There's nothing else supposed to be out here for 1,000 miles. Radar doesn't lie, Sarge, said Gin Chen, zooming in. That's not a natural cave system. That's architecture. And that channel? It looks like a dry dock for a submarine.
There was no debate. An uncharted subterranean military base of unknown origin sitting right under a U.S. facility? We had to go in. It was no longer a cleanup job. It was a recon mission. We spent the next few hours drilling. Using our heavy-duty thermal lance, we cut a narrow vertical shaft down through the 200 feet of ancient compressed ice that separated the two bases. Finally, we hit the roof of the structure. It was steel, frozen solid, and nearly a foot thick. Another hour of burning through metal, and we had our entry point. I was the first one down the rope. The moment I dropped into the darkness below, the cold changed. It was a different kind of cold, drier, deeper. The air was dead, heavy with the faint, frozen smells of diesel, ozone, and wool uniforms. My headlamp cut a sharp beam through the black, revealing a massive, cavernous space. Frost covered everything like a layer of glass. We had breached a tomb. The rest of the team followed me down. We moved in tactical formation, our flashlight beams dancing across the scene. We were in the main U-boat pen. To our right, encased in a thick cocooned ice, was the unmistakable shape of a World War II-era German submarine, its steel hull pristine as if it had docked yesterday. On its conning tower, just visible through the frost, was a faded swastika. We were in a Nazi base, 80 years old and perfectly preserved. It was a ghost ship in a bottle of ice. "Command needs to see this," Davis whispered, his voice full of awe and dread. "This is historically significant," I said, my voice tight. "History can wait. First, we find out what they were doing here. Let's find their command center." We swept through the frozen corridors, our boots crunching on the frost-covered floors. We passed by frozen barracks, a mess hall with plates of fossilized food still on the tables, and storage rooms filled with crates of weapons and supplies, all bearing the German eagle. It was a place where time had simply stopped. We finally found a heavy steel door marked Forschungsabteilung, Research Division. We pried it open and stepped inside. It was a laboratory, filled with strange, unfamiliar equipment and tables covered in frozen documents. But it was the large chalkboard on the far wall that drew our attention. It was covered with complex equations and diagrams, but in the center, circled multiple times, were two words written in large, emphatic letters: Projekt Chronos. And beneath the name was a detailed technical drawing of a massive metallic object. It looked like a bell. The crude drawing of the bell on the chalkboard felt like a religious icon in a dead church. It dominated the room. Chen started taking pictures of the documents on the tables, careful not to disturb the frozen, brittle paper. They were filled with incomprehensible physics, but the same two words appeared over and over: Die Glocke. "This lab is a dead end," I said, my breath pluming in the frigid air. "They didn't build it here, they studied it. Let's find where they kept it." We used the more detailed schematics we found pinned to a corkboard to navigate. The base was larger than we thought, a labyrinth of ice-caked tunnels. The plans led us to the lowest level of the facility, to a single, massive, circular vault door set into the solid bedrock. This was different from the functional steel doors we'd seen elsewhere. This was something else. The metal was a dark, non-reflective black, and etched around its circumference were strange symbols. They weren't German runes. They looked older, more arcane. It felt like we were standing at the entrance to a pharaoh's tomb. It took us 2 hours to breach it. We set a small-shaped breaching charge, the plastic explosives sticking easily to the frozen metal. We retreated down the corridor and detonated it. The resulting boom was a physical shockwave, a violent, profane sound that ripped through the 80-year-old silence of the base. The vault door, its locking mechanism shattered, was pushed slightly ajar. Working together, we managed to pry it open enough to slip through. The room inside was a perfect circle, maybe 100 feet across. The walls were lined with strange black tiles that seemed to absorb the light from our headlamps. And in the dead center of the chamber, suspended from the ceiling by 3 massive, frost-covered chains, was the bell. It was real. It was enormous, at least 15 feet tall, made of the same heavy, dark metal as the door. Its surface was covered in the same strange runic symbols. It didn't reflect our light. It swallowed it. The air in the chamber was so cold it felt like a physical weight on my lungs. And there was a feeling, a low, subsonic vibration that you felt in the fillings of your teeth. We fanned out, cautiously approaching it. Chen pulled out a handheld sensor, trying to get a reading on it. "I'm getting nothing, Sarge. No radiation, no EM field. It's just there." He took another step closer, holding the sensor near the bell's surface. As he did, the runes etched into the metal began to glow with a faint, sickly violet light. The low hum in the air intensified, just for a moment, into an audible, dissonant chime. The bell wasn't dead. It was sleeping.
"Chen, back away now," I ordered, my voice tight. But Chen was mesmerized, his eyes wide. "Sarge, look at this." His sensor was going wild, the screen a mess of nonsensical data. "It's putting out something. It's not energy, I don't know what it is." As part of its diagnostic sweep, Chen's scanner emitted a high-frequency pulse, a standard procedure to map material density. The moment the pulse hit the bell, all hell broke loose. The faint violet glow of the runes erupted into a blinding, silent flash. A deafening bell-like chime exploded, not in the room, but inside our skulls. A physical, agonizing tone that made the world vibrate. The air around the bell began to warp and shimmer like a mirage. Our headlamps flickered violently, and the radios in our ears screamed with a burst of static. Then, in the warped air next to the bell, a figure flickered into existence. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in a white 1940s-style lab coat with a Nazi eagle emblem on the breast pocket. He was translucent, a ghostly, shimmering projection. He looked utterly terrified and confused. He stared down at his own shimmering hands, then looked up at us, his eyes wide with a horror that transcended time. He was an echo, a ghost from 80 years in the past. He stumbled forward, his form wavering, and passed directly through Corporal Davis.
Davis screamed, collapsing to his knees, clutching his head. "God, I'm so cold," he gasped, his teeth chattering. I heard him whispering." The ghostly scientist took 2 more stumbling steps, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he flickered and vanished. We were left in the ringing silence, our minds struggling to process what we had just seen. The bell was no longer dormant. It was glowing with a steady, malevolent violet light, and the chime was a constant, maddening hum at the edge of our hearing. "Talk to me," I said into my radio, my voice shaking. All I got back was a wall of roaring static. We were cut off. From the surface, from each other. Then, through the static, a new sound began to filter through. A voice, faint and distorted, speaking in panicked German. "Das Experiment ist außer Kontrolle. Das Experiment ist außer Kontrolle." It was a radio broadcast from a war that ended 80 years ago, and we were hearing it live.
The panicked German voice from the past faded, replaced by the incessant, skull-drilling chime of the bell. We were trapped in a bubble of impossible physics. I tried to rally the team, to get us to fall back to the lab, but the chamber itself seemed to be working against us. "Henderson, with me!" I shouted, turning to my rifleman. "We're pulling back!" But Henderson didn't respond. He was standing rigid, his rifle half raised, his face a mask of confusion. He completed the motion, bringing the rifle to his shoulder. Then, in a sickening, unnatural jerk, he snapped back to his original position, his rifle down at his side. Then he did it again, and again. He was trapped in a 2-second loop of time, a living glitch in reality. The click of his rifle sling became a rhythmic, maddening beat against the bell's constant hum. It wasn't just him. I saw a drop of melting ice fall from the ceiling, hang suspended in the air a foot from the ground, and then shoot back up to its origin. The light from my flickering headlamp cast a shadow of Davis that seemed to move a half-second before he did. This wasn't a haunting. The bell wasn't showing us the past. It was breaking the present. "Henderson!" I yelled, stepping towards him, my hand outstretched. The moment my fingers touched the fabric of his uniform, a violent jolt shot up my arm. It wasn't electricity, it was a feeling of pure temporal dissonance. My vision exploded in a flash of white, and for a split second, I saw not the ice cave, but a dense green jungle, and I heard the screech of an animal I'd never heard before. Just as quickly, my vision snapped back. The contact had broken the loop. Henderson stumbled, shaking his head. "Sarge, what just happened?" He looked pale and exhausted, like he'd just run a marathon. He had no memory of it. Before I could answer, a new sound filled the chamber, overwhelming the chime of the bell. It was the deafening, panicked klaxon of a submarine dive alarm blaring from all around us. We heard the rush of water and the frantic, echoing shouts of German sailors. The air suddenly tasted of salt and diesel fuel. The bell wasn't just showing us echoes anymore. It was pulling the final catastrophic moments of this base's history directly into our timeline, and we were standing at the epicenter.
The phantom sound of the flooding was so real, so absolute, that we all instinctively scrambled for higher ground, fleeing the chamber. We stumbled back out through the shattered vault door into the main corridor, but the sounds followed us. The blaring klaxon, the panicked shouts in German, the terrifying roar of incoming water. "It's not real," Davis yelled, his hands pressed against his ears. "It's in our heads. It's the bell."
But as we ran, the very walls of the frozen base began to flicker. For a terrifying, nauseating second, the thick frost and 80 years of decay vanished. The corridor was suddenly clean, brightly lit with electric lamps, and filled with the frantic, translucent figures of German sailors running in the opposite direction. They passed through us like smoke, each one leaving a wave of bone-deep cold and the faint, ghostly smell of sweat and seawater. We were ghosts in their timeline, witnessing their final, desperate moments. We saw an SS officer, his face a mask of rage, screaming unheard orders. We saw a young sailor slip on the deck, his terror-filled eyes looking right through me before he was trampled by his crewmates. The vision flickered again, and we saw what they were running from. A huge pipe on the wall behind us seemed to burst, spewing a silent, ghostly torrent of water into the corridor. The past was collapsing, and we were caught in the debris. We finally made it back to the main U-boat pen, the vast, cavernous chamber where we had first entered. As we stumbled into the larger space, the flickering visions and the deafening sounds of the past finally receded, leaving us once again in the profound, frozen silence of the present. The only sound was our own ragged breathing. We were panting, leaning against a stack of frozen crates, trying to get our bearings. The bell's maddening chime was still a faint hum in the back of our skulls, a reminder that the engine of this insanity was still running. "What do we do now, Sarge?" Chen asked, his voice a strained whisper. Before I could answer, a new light caught my eye. It was coming from the U-boat, the one encased in ice. Inside the conning tower, through the thick frosted glass of a porthole, a faint violet light was now glowing, the same sickly color as the runes on the bell. As we all stared, a dark shape moved in front of the light. A hand, pale and gaunt, pressed itself against the inside of the frozen glass. The U-boat was no longer a tomb. Something inside was now awake.
We stood frozen, our headlamps fixed on the U-boat. The pale hand remained pressed against the glass, fingers splayed, before slowly sliding away, leaving a smear on the frost. The violet light inside pulsed, a slow, sickly heartbeat in the dark. "There can't be anyone in there," Davis stammered, his rifle shaking in his hands. "They've been dead for 80 years. It's another echo, Sarge, like the scientist." But this felt different. This wasn't a translucent ghost. This was solid. It was real. A deep groaning sound echoed through the pen, the sound of stressed metal. It was coming from the U-boat. The thick ice encasing the conning tower began to crack, thin fissures spreading across its surface like a spider web. A low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump began, coming from the main hatch. Something was trying to get out. "Take cover!" I yelled, pulling the team behind a stack of frozen crates. The thumping grew louder, more frantic. The thick steel of the conning tower hatch began to visibly buckle outwards. With a final, explosive shriek of tearing metal, the hatch blew off its hinges and crashed onto the icy deck. For a moment, only the pulsing violet light spilled out from the opening. Then, a figure, slowly, deliberately, pulled itself out. It was a man, dressed in the immaculate dark blue uniform of a Kriegsmarine captain.
His face was pale, waxy, and unnaturally smooth like a department store mannequin. He moved with a stiff, fluid grace, his pristine uniform completely free of the frost that covered everything else. He was an island of perfect preservation in a sea of decay. He stood atop the conning tower, surveying the scene. Then he looked at us. His eyes were not human. They were swirling, miniature vortexes of the same violet light that emanated from the bell, mesmerizing and utterly terrifying. He was a man who had been steeped in raw time for 80 years, and it had warped him into something new. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, a cacophony of noise erupted from our radios. The panicked German broadcasts from before, the chime of the bell, the ghostly screams of dying sailors, all layered over each other in a maddening auditory assault. He was a walking temporal anomaly, a living radio broadcasting his own personal apocalypse. He took a single, deliberate step off the conning tower and onto the deck. As his boot touched the ground, the digital readouts on our rifles and wrist-mounted devices all flickered. And then they all changed to display the same date, April 12th, 1945.
Fire, I screamed, the word tearing through my throat. My team, disciplined to the core, reacted instantly. 4 M4 rifles erupted in a deafening roar, the muzzle flashes blinding in the vast, dark pen. But the sound was wrong. It was flat, dead, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the base. The bullets were wrong, too. Instead of invisible streaks of supersonic lead, we saw them. The bright tracers crawled through the air, slowing to a visible crawl like lazy fireflies. The air around the captain was thick, a temporal mire that resisted our modern weapons. Before the rounds could even reach him, they stopped dead in the air, glowing a dull red. In the space of a heartbeat, they corroded, turning from copper-jacketed slugs into pitted, rusted relics that fell to the frozen floor with a soft, metallic clatter. They were 80 years old. We stared in stunned disbelief. Our weapons were useless. The captain showed no emotion. He looked down at the rusted bullets on the ground with a look of mild, scientific curiosity. Then he slowly raised his arm, his finger extending to point directly at PFC Henderson. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just pointed. Henderson screamed. It was a raw, gurgling sound of pure agony. We watched, helpless, as he began to change. His youth evaporated like water on a hot skillet. His dark hair turned gray, then white, then fell out in clumps. Deep, cavernous wrinkles tore across his face. His back hunched, his body withering inside his uniform. His hands became gnarled claws. In 5 horrific seconds, he went from a 20-year-old soldier to a 100-year-old man. He collapsed to the ground not as a body, but as a pile of fine gray dust. All that was left of him was his modern uniform and a pair of ancient, rust-covered dog tags that clattered on the concrete. The captain had killed him with time. We were paralyzed, our minds shattered by the sheer physical impossibility of what we had just witnessed. How do you fight an enemy who can turn you into a memory? The captain lowered his hand, his mission accomplished. Then,
with a slow, deliberate motion, his head turned and his swirling violet eyes fixed on the next man in our line, Corporal Davis. We weren't soldiers fighting an enemy. We were mayflies in the presence of a god, and we were next.
There was no order, no strategy, just pure animal panic. We broke and ran, the sound of Henderson's ancient dog tags clattering on the floor echoed in our ears as we fled back into the frozen corridors, leaving the dust of our comrade behind. The captain didn't pursue. He just watched us with those terrible, timeless eyes. Our only thought was to get back to the source, back to the bell.
We scrambled back into the circular chamber, the bell still humming with its violent purple energy. With our combined strength, we managed to force the shattered vault door shut, wedging a steel pipe through the handles to barricade it. We were trapped in the engine room of the apocalypse, the maddening chime of the bell drilling into our minds.
We had only a moment's respite before a slow, heavy boom echoed from the vault door. It wasn't the sound of something hitting the door, but of the door itself crying out in agony. A patch of the thick black metal flashed red, then instantly turned to a deep orange rust, flaking away. He wasn't trying to break the door down. He was turning it into dust.
"It's no good," Chen yelled over the chime, his hands flying across his scanner's interface. "I can't find a way to shut it down. The power source, it's not on any of the schematics. It's drawing energy from somewhere else. Something inside the bell. It's a parasite, and this whole chamber is its host." With a final groaning sigh, the ancient metal of the vault door crumbled into a pile of rust and dust. The captain stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the corridor lights. His violet eyes swept the room, fixing on Davis. We were cornered animals, facing a predator that hunted with entropy itself. Corporal Davis, who had been muttering to himself since the ghost passed through him, finally snapped. With a wild, incoherent scream, he charged the captain, his combat knife held high. The captain didn't move. He simply raised a hand, and as Davis ran into his open palm, he began to change. He didn't age this time. He de-aged. He shrank, his face becoming younger, smoother, a teenager, a child, an infant. Then, with a soft pop of displaced air, he vanished entirely. It was just me and Chen. The captain took a slow step towards us. "Sarge, I've got it!" Chen screamed, his face a mask of terrified revelation. "It's a singularity, a stable temporal singularity. The only way to stop it is to destabilize it. It needs a massive energy shock, something modern, something high yield." My eyes darted to the pack of breaching charges we'd used on the vault door, still lying on the floor. Our last pieces of 21st century technology, our only weapon that time hadn't already consumed. I knew what I had to do. "Cover me!" I yelled, grabbing the pack. Chen laid down a desperate, futile, covering fire, his bullets aging to dust, halfway across the room. I ran, my legs pumping, my lungs on fire. The bell grew larger in my vision, its violent purple glow and maddening chime consuming the world. The captain turned to me, his expression unreadable, and began to stalk forward, a terrible, inevitable force. I reached the bell just as he closed in. I didn't have time to set the charges properly. I ripped the plastic explosives from the pack, slapped them against the cold runic surface of the ancient artifact, and armed the remote detonator. The captain raised his hand, his fingers outstretched, time itself gathering around him. I squeezed the trigger. The world didn't explode. It shattered. A silent white flash of pure temporal energy vaporized the room. I was adrift in an ocean of pure time. I saw the birth of stars, the death of suns. I saw the beginning and the end of everything, all in a single, eternal, and agonizing moment. Months later, a new Army reclamation team enters the now collapsed and silent Greenland base. They find the bodies of the first team, each a temporal paradox. One a pile of dust, another a uniform with nothing inside. They find me last, half buried in the snow near the epicenter of the blast, where only shattered crystalline fragments of the bell remain. My hair is snow white, my face is unaged, but my eyes are ancient. I am alive, but I am no longer in the present. I am trapped forever in the white, silent, eternal moment of the explosion. The log ends as they report my discovery, and my eyes flicker open.